a citizen, he keyed up and he said, officers down, officers deceased.
Said, is he dead? And he said, I just need to talk to you face to face. I just threw the phone down. And, life was good. It really was. We had a lab and a new baby. And
welcome back, Blue Grit family, watchers, listeners, voyeurs. Man, the last couple of episodes, this is of the 4 that I have been on, Clint McNear has been absent for 3 of them.
Well, you may have a replacement sitting over here for Clint.
I might. I've got a co-host today, a good friend of mine and a field rep with Tmpa, Tony Wright. Tony, welcome to the Blue Grit podcast.
I've been trying to get on this thing for a while.
You have.
I guess it all worked out for me this time. That it happened to be in Austin.
Yes.
Whenever Clint double booked himself.
Yeah, that's right, man. Welcome to the show. You're going to co-host with me today. Actually, you're going to interview me and a close friend of mine, who I consider a close friend, and we've been through a really interesting story that we're going to share with the world today. Michaela Burns.
Hi.
Welcome on.
Thank you for having me.
Nice meeting you, Michaela.
Yeah. So we got an interesting show today. But before we dive into this, you guys subscribe to the channel. And again, download these episodes. That's how we kind of judge the analytics. For y'all that don't know, you can't judge a podcast channel by the listeners. You have to download, or you have to judge them by the amount of downloads. So it's really, really, really important, for you guys that don't download the episodes. It helps us out by downloading these. So if you would, go ahead and click that auto download on whatever platforms you guys listen to. So I got to admit something, Tony. Michaela, this is her second time on the show, but this is probably her first time to debut for the people that are going to listen or see her. She came down a couple weeks ago.
I did.
And we had a technical error on a power outage here at the office. And what I did not realize is that the power outage sent our soundboard into a stock mode setting. So I drove back to East Texas, extremely excited about the quality of episode that we had recorded together. That was when Clint did make it on that episode. So I get home, and I'm doing this magical episode. I sit down, had a nice cup of coffee. Janet, my wife, had actually made breakfast. It was a magical morning. Janet actually woke up before 7 o'clock, and the birds were chirping, and I sit down, and there's no audio. None. And I freaked out. I mean, I almost threw up. And anyway.
Well, yeah, you did tell me that. You said you were very sick.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
And so there was kind of a moment where I was like, well, I've got to let Michaela know, because I'm sure she's going to be anticipating this magical episode from Tyler Owen and Blue Grit Podcast. And so, but you took it like a champ. You took it on the chin, and her response was, well, hey, brush it off. It's not a big deal. I can come back to Austin. You just let me know, and I'll be there. So I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
of course.
Anyway.
Awesome.
But before we dive into our story, Tony, tell us a bit, tell us about you and who you are and who you represent and what you do for TMPA and tell us about you.
All right. Well, you're from a small town in you're from Dallas, but you live in a small town in East Texas, and I'm from a small town in North Texas. Farmersville, Texas is where I was born and raised. My family got there to Collin County in about 1850. So we've been there. We've been there since the beginning. I always knew growing up I'd want to be a policeman or a fireman. Probably should have went the fireman route, but
yeah.
Here I am. I started in 1989 at the Collin County Sheriff's Office, so I'm still live in Collin County, from Collin County. That's where I started my career. Worked for Allen PD for a while. Went to Frisco, and that's where I retired from. After I retired from Frisco, I was lucky enough, because Clint had an event in Plano, showed up at that, and next thing you know, I started working for Tmpa, and that was 8 years ago.
Wow. What do you enjoy most about working for Tmpa?
I tell everybody asks me what I do, and as a field rep, and there's, several of us throughout the state, there's not many, you can't really put a label on what we do. It really is a lifestyle, and you have to be passionate about taking care of other law enforcement officers and their families.
Yep.
So it truly is a passion. So that's what I enjoy most about it, is just going out and just making a difference in a working officer's day to day, whether it be a legal question or a critical incident, or heaven forbid their house burns down.
Yeah. And what I think is so interesting is that, I do live in East Texas, but the culture of North Texas and the culture of East Texas, it really is so much different. And like with J.P. Rodriguez down in Weslaco and in the Valley, and you got Leighton Canary down in the Golden Triangle, Robbie Campbell. What makes us, I think, so unique and so awesome of all field services within Tmpa is that each individual person, each field rep, number one, we're all unique and we're all a lot of fun and we're all crazy as hell, quite honestly. But man, when we unite, we make one hell of a team, because you've got strengths that I don't have. I've got some strengths that maybe you don't have. But when we unify together and we all unite, it's something magical happens.
I completely agree with that. I mean, if you don't know who your TMPA field rep is, look on the website, call the 800 number and the rep will call you. But we're truly passionate about taking care of law enforcement. And I think that passion translates into the service that we provide. And I think that's what sets us apart from really everybody else in the country.
I agree 110%. 110%. There's certain events that we all together, I guess there's probably 2 or 3. One of them is coming up here in a couple weeks. One being the Peace Officer Memorial. Mm-hmm. And so if you've never been to that before here in Texas, it's here in Austin. And we're gonna touch on that. That's where she and I kind of reconnected. But anyway.
There's 80,000 officers in Texas, and you come across and you start talking, to guys who are working or even retired officers, and there's a lot of them that have never been to the memorial. And I think it's important that we as a profession don't forget the guys who came before us who were on that wall. And I think it's important that everybody go by when they're in Austin and quite honestly just pay their respects.
Yeah, I agree. Speaking of the wall, and really another reason why we're here, Michaela, you want to kind of give an intro of yourself and where you grew up at, and how you got introduced to the organizations that you represent and are a part of today.
Sure. My name is Michaela, like you said. I am from a little bitty town in northeast Texas called Atlanta, Texas. Hole in the wall. Hole in the wall.
In Cass County.
In Cass County. Yes. Born and raised there, graduated from high school in 97. Went to school at Stephen F. Austin, lived in Houston for a little while, moved back to Atlanta, Texas, because wasn't quite ready for Houston.
No.
A little bit.
Well, Atlanta to Houston, when I first heard of Atlanta, I had a friend of mine I told you that was from Atlanta, and I'm like, "You're from Georgia?"
Yeah,
and he's like, "No, there's one in East Texas too."
What? Yeah, it's small. But I moved back, and I started working at the district attorney's office, and that's where I met my husband, Scott. He was a state trooper. He came in one day. Not gonna lie, I kind of thought he was weird because he was really shy. Yeah. I said hi to him, and he kind of said hi, but not really. Which I'm not shy at all.
No,
not at all. No. And so when he was leaving, I said bye to him, and he just kind of said bye really fast and scurried off and ran right into the door. And his hat came up. It was actually kind of comical. And I just remember thinking that he was kind of weird, But he ended up calling me a couple of days later and asking me out on a date. So we went out.
And when was that?
That was December of 2005.
Okay.
December 2005.
I actually used to work with my wife. My wife is also a retired officer, Tara, and she used to always say I was the, we used to see each other at work, and she said I was the youngest, oldest looking guy she ever saw, because back in the time, it was back in the 90s, and things are a little different than they were now, but she always gives me a hard time about that too. There was a little weirdness there, I think.
Well, Scott was 10 years older than me. I was 26, he was 36, so a little bit of an age gap, but I thought he was handsome, and he seemed nice. He just seemed kind of I mean, he ran into the door. So
Yeah.
what am I supposed to think?
Well, there's a little age gap between my wife and myself too, and I'm not going to tell you which way it goes. But
Let me guess. Yeah. So that's how Scott and I met. Ended up getting married not too long after that, and had a baby, all within a few months.
that's a lot.
Yeah, we met. Yeah, we met in December, January. Got engaged in April of that same year. Got married in September. I got pregnant in March. Had her in November, and then everything happened that April.
Well, that's kind of why we're here today. I know there was an incident, and well, first of all, you said you came where you met. You were in Atlanta. Did y'all stay in Atlanta the whole time? Did y'all move?
No, well, the Cass County District Attorney's office was in Linden, which is where I was working, and he had a home in Linden, which is right by Atlanta. It's only like 10 miles maybe. So we, when we got married, I moved. He had just built a house, and I moved in with him. So we were just living in Linden. You know, life was good. It really was. We had a lab and a new baby, and it really couldn't have gotten any better at that point. You know, it was a good life, very good life.
Yeah.
And so, married, husband, you'll stay there. So how? And I know Tyler and I talked earlier that. So how did y'all connect? As far as if he was up in Atlanta, or were you close? Or?
Yeah. So 2000. So for the listeners that know me or that don't know me, I grew up in Irving. Began my career at the Dallas County Sheriff's Office. Starting your career at that point in time, that was when law enforcement really, you'd show up for a test in Irving, Plano, Frisco. There'd be 500 officers, and so during this point in time, I had just graduated the police academy. My then girlfriend, her father had called and said, "Hey, we're moving to East Texas. Make me a promise that you're going to move out here within 2 years with my daughter, and I'll let you marry her." So, of course, I said yes, and I moved to East Texas, and I went to work at Jefferson PD. So I was 21 years old, and I'm not going to say that there wasn't some training, but it was pretty much threw me the keys and said, go forth and conquer. And what I'm fixing to say is not a being disrespectful to any state trooper whatsoever. But please, for the state troopers that do listen to this podcast, understand that when I was 21 years old, the perception, in my opinion, was that you guys were like iconic. I mean, you guys were intimidating. You guys had a very established, very reputable. It was a huge agency, and it was an agency that I wanted to be a part of. It was a very respected, uniformed military type organization, just as such as like Dallas Police Department, Dallas County Sheriff's Office. Like, that's something that I wanted to be. And to follow through with that, Scott saw her husband. He was so approachable. And at that point in time, a lot of cops, they weren't.
Well, especially when you're the young 21, 22-year-old.
You don't
have that person that's going to take you under their wing, especially in a small town like Jefferson where you're working.
And think about this. He didn't even work for my agency. This was a 6-7 man department. And so Scott literally would show up to work, him and another guy named Mike Horn. They would show up to work and work with me and get in the same car with me. I mean, so I want you to think about that. The man would get in the same car with me or have me ride with him, and we would do traffic stops. He would essentially be my FTO without asking for FTO pay, without doing any of the FTO paperwork, probably violating D.P.S. policy. D.P.S. would shit if they knew that he was doing that. Quite honestly,
Probably.
But he did it because he wanted me to be better and he wanted me to be safe. That's why he did it. And so he mentored the hell out of me. And to this day, Mike Horn, whenever I do see him, I hug the hell out of him. And I've got so much respect for those guys. And when I say that we were a family, and that's honestly, and what was so hurtful about the whole situation was that, me and my wife were not from the area. And so if you put this in context or think about it, I knew that Scott was on maternity leave because Michaela was, she just had the baby. And so Scott was out for several months. And the week prior to this incident, we had all hung out. And I mean, the entire Marion County Sheriff's Office, again, a 15, 12-man agency, every single state trooper that was assigned to Marion County, which is 3, 2 game wardens, and there was 5 City of Jefferson police officers. So the entire law enforcement of that county all hung out together at a party, okay? So it was the first time that my wife and Michaela got to hang out and meet each other, which we were very close in age, which we didn't have any friends in Jefferson because we were the outsiders. And let's face it, some cops' wives can be different to other cops' wives. And so my wife really was like, man, hey, I've actually got to hang out with another cop's wife that's my age, and we got a lot in common, And so this was the first week, and so I think they exchanged numbers. They planned on maybe going out, the following week, and it was just a really good weekend. And so the following weekend, me and Janet went out for our anniversary, and me and Scott talked and bullshitted back and forth, and their baby was 3 months old, and again, he was continuing to kind of talk up with me, and I've been on for about a year now, but this was all prior to him mentoring me. So the day of the incident was a Sunday afternoon. I worked 7 p to 7 a. I checked on around 6 o'clock. Wasn't much going on. I checked on early. I saw Scott briefly. He said, hey, I'm fixing to run some traffic up by the lake. Where Marion County sits is about 50 miles south of Texarkana, and we are approximately 20 miles west of the Louisiana state line, and we are 20 miles north of Marshall, Texas. For the listeners that understand this, it sits between Lake of the Pines and Caddo Lake, Texas. Lake of the Pines, and I don't know why this is. Maybe you can answer this. I don't know why, but a lot of lakes in Texas, for whatever reason, seems to drag up a lot of methamphetamine users and dope users and crime, and I don't know why, but it seems to just attract shitbirds,
That is very true.
Yeah, and I don't know why that is.
When I grew up, we have Lake Lavon, and you have, I don't know how you pronounce it, Culleoke, around Princeton, Texas, that, there was always a lot of stuff going on out there.
So Scott said, hey, I'm fixing to run some traffic up by the lake, and I'll meet you back in town, and we'll go get some dinner. I said, oh, okay, yeah, sounds good. So around 7:50, about 7:30, he had made one traffic stop. I knew where he was at. And to put stuff in context, we had one sheriff's office radio, channel. So on the channel, it was D.P.S, game wardens, the police department, and then the sheriff's office. So he cleared that traffic stop. And why, I've never really asked this, and maybe I can ask Mike Horn. Scott or Mike never carried a portable radio. He would, and for the guys that have been on the street a long time, D.P.S had a system or a way they set their radios up that you could set it on a PA setting to where when they were out of the vehicle, they could listen. The radio transmission would be put on their PA system on the front of their speaker. That's how Scott liked to do it. That's how maybe the guy that trained him did it. And that's just kind of the only way you would ever see Scott wear a portable radio were on special events or when he got transferred to like a task force, if he got transferred. That's the only time that I ever saw him wear a portable. And you may have never heard that before.
I don't.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I remember if he. I mean, obviously he didn't.
Well, that's some of the differences right there, just between a rural county out in East Texas where everybody's running off of one dispatch, as opposed to where I am in the Metroplex, where you have multiple channels at the same PD. For different sectors or different zones.
Yeah, so he would never carry a portable, and that was just the way he operated. Is that he would always go back to the vehicle, and that's how it was. My point being, is that if he ever got in a foot chase, it was not uncommon for him not to have radio traffic with him. So he began to call out that he was in a vehicle pursuit, and so I start to kind of head that way, as did some other county deputies.
Are you working you're at Jefferson PD, right, at this point?
Yep, Jefferson PD. And, he's heading back into town. He's headed south. And so he said he's fixing to bail. He's fixing to bail, which tells us that he's fixing to be, on foot. And as I'm driving to him, I just had this weird, sick feeling. Something's not right, because there was a time frame that something was off. Minutes, you know. And for those that have ever driven a Crown Vic, I'm not sure how fast that thing went. But it went from fast to super fast. And I just had this sick feeling that something was not right with my friend, you know. And as I was driving, a citizen happened to see what was going on. And I'll never forget this. He keyed up and he said, officers down, officers deceased.
So a citizen got on the radio in the car at this point and calls that out. And, of course, everybody's trying to get to the scene, so I can imagine what happened when that came over the radio.
So so I showed up, and Scott was in bad shape. And the suspect had already fled, you know, the scene. And it was obvious to me that, you know, he was already gone. So I immediately began, you know, giving suspect information updates.
Well, how did you have the suspect? Was it just from the radio traffic initially?
The radio traffic, and then I began asking the witness that was there, hey, you know, what was he driving? And so I began to radio that in of what direction, which way he was going, because the FM road we were on was only one way to go. And so the responding deputy was coming in off that way. And so, but I immediately began thinking, you know, she's got a 3-month-old at the house. And how is this? You know, this is a small town, and she can kind of expand upon this later on. My biggest fear was what happened, like, you know, and she'll talk about that later on. But I secured the crime scene. I began to notify, you know, the D.P.S. sergeant. But the most difficult thing I had to do was to put things in context. The 2 state troopers there was 3 stationed in Marion County: Scott Burns, Mike Horn, and another guy named James Jordan. Mike Horn and Scott Burns were best friends, grade school up, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Both went through the TDC together. I believe Mike was a lieutenant. Scott was a captain.
I think Scott was a sergeant with TDCJ. I could be wrong, though. That was before me.
Yeah.
I just remember he has a plaque that says sergeant.
Mike had talked Scott into joining. Both worked for the prison system, and Mike talked Scott into coming and joining D.P.S. And so to make that call to his best friend to say, hey, I'm standing here with him, and I need you to let his wife know before it gets to her, you know, it was just a really, really, really bad situation.
It is horrible. And is it April?
April 29th.
And dark outside, I'm assuming.
No, it was
dusk.
It was still, it was dusk, you know. So now we've got a kind of a manhunt, you know, at this point. And I mean, it you know, flooded police at that point. So suspect information was given out really quickly. DPS was able to get they weren't able to get the camera footage because of the extent. Quickly, it took a little bit because of the gunfire that took place. He was able to shoot some of the video camera footage. But within, I think, maybe 3 or 4 hours, they were able to get a bolo out for him, a be on the lookout, and a suspect identified and warrants cut.
So obviously you've just gone to the worst possible scene that you can imagine going to, rolling up, and, you know, you're in this pursuit. Your friend is obviously injured. So you make that decision to call his best friend. And then, Michaela, how did you, were you at the house? I'm assuming everything normal that day? And
it was normal. It
Right.
had been normal. Normal day like any other. I worked my 8 to 5. Actually, Scott and I had lunch earlier that day because he was working 2 to 11. So he stopped by to get me, and we went and we ate. And, you know, got off work at 5 like I always do, ran into Atlanta to run some errands, and my mom would keep my daughter. She babysat for me. So I went to my parents' house, and I was watching. She would usually make dinner, and I would eat. And when Scott worked late, I would kind of take my time going home, you know, just because he wasn't going to be at home. So, you know, I was just sitting there and just got through watching American Idol. Actually, he had called me earlier, too. I talked to him about 7. He called and just said that he had pulled someone over earlier and whatnot. And, I mean, asked me what I was doing. I told him I was watching American Idol, and he said, well, have fun with that because he hated it. Yeah. So I told him that, it was going to be finishing up soon, and I'd see him when he got home, and I loved him. He told me he loved me, too, and, it was the last time I talked to him. And, it's weird because, like, looking back on things, how my family was acting was, so basically, it was about 8 o'clock, and obviously American Idol had ended. So I was getting my daughter ready to, for us to leave. I was putting her diaper bag in the car, and my brother called. And I answered, and I said, hello. And, he just kind of sat there for a second, and he was like, hey. I said, hey. He's like, is Mom there? And I said, yeah, she's here. And he goes, can I talk to her? And I said, sure. And I just handed the phone to her. Like I said, now, looking back, he had a weird tone in his voice. But I just went outside and kept doing what I was doing. And my mom came out there, and she sat down, and, she said, Kayla, did you just talk to Scott? And I said, yeah, I just talked to him. And she said, well, try to call him, So I called him because I thought that he called. And usually when I would call him, if he was on a traffic stop, he would call me right back, So I called, and he didn't answer. So I left him a voicemail, and then I handed the phone back to my mom. And I said, here's, he didn't answer. I just kept going about my business. And, I can see her now just kind of, she's sitting in this rocking chair outside, and, she just didn't look right. But, of course, at the time, I couldn't see that. She just said, well, can you just try to call him again? And I was like, did he call or something? And she said, well, I don't know, just call him. So I called him again, and he didn't answer. So I said, Mom, he's not answering. He'll call me back in a minute. And she said, okay. And I said, what is going on? And she said, well, I don't know, but, he could have been in some kind of accident. So, of course, I'm like, accident, where is he at a hospital? Because I'm thinking car accident,
Right.
But what had happened, apparently the situation was my brother that called, my brother Mike, his in-laws were at a baseball game in Atlanta, and this is small town for you.
Yeah, small town.
And the sheriff happened to be there with his radio blasting, and it came over the radio that state trooper or a cop. I'm not exactly sure how it came over the radio, but basically that he was dead.
So what you're telling me is your brother was at a baseball game.
My brother's in-laws were at a baseball game. My brother wasn't even there. He was at home.
So the in-laws just overhear this on the radio.
Mm-hmm. Freak out.
And then word trickled back.
They call my brother, or, they call my sister-in-law, their daughter, and they're crying because they hear that Scott was dead. And my brother, so my sister-in-law's freaking out, crying. He's like, just calm down. Kayla hasn't even called. No one's called us. It's probably just, a mistake. So when he called, it threw him off a little that I answered but it kind of made him feel better.
Yeah.
Because I answered. But
to this day, and you may not know this, and this is so there's two things that are as cops, and you with the organization, and we'll talk about this in a minute, like flashbacks.
Yeah.
But when you were calling, that's one thing. If I remember correctly, he had a flip phone. If I remember correctly, and I remember the phone going off and me standing there looking.
Oh, really?
Oh, wow.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I called a lot. Once I found out that he had been in an accident, I kept calling, and I kept calling, and I kept calling. Yeah, I called several times, because then I was freaking out, maximum freak out level at that point, just panic.
Well, yeah, because you're hearing something that nobody's really telling you what's going on. You don't know. You're kind of hearing all this third party.
And no one ever said he was dead. They said accident. So,
well, and
I'm thinking he's in a car accident.
And for the listeners to understand, the family of Scott, the town, this is the stereotypical hometown boy. The family had a feed store. This is your rural, stereotyped East Texas family. Loved, the entire town loved the Burn family. It's so when word got out, Marion County is where he was stationed at, which is just south of Linden. We asked for assistance from Cass County, which is his hometown, his home county, and then word really began to get out quickly. And so that's another way or how word began to travel.
So at this point, so you're finding out third party. You've called his best friend,
who's also a D.P.S. trooper. So how did you finally find out, Michaela? What?
So, I kept calling Scott and calling Scott and calling Scott.
And that's got to be all because, obviously Tyler and Scott were friends, mentor, looked up to Scott. All of a sudden he sees you calling on that phone and he knows he can't.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's horrible.
That is horrible. I didn't know that, actually. I'm sorry. That's so sad.
I think I don't know what some people's perceptions are, but we're human.
Yeah.
Police officers are human. Mm-hmm. That's the absolute worst thing that I can imagine happening.
Yeah, it is. For everybody, and so after calling multiple times, the phone finally rang. My parents' phone. And, this is, 2008. So they had, it was a cordless landline, but they didn't have caller ID, So Scott would always call me right back. When I called, he'd always call me right back. So when the phone rang, I just knew it was him. I knew it was him calling me back because he always did, And so when I answered, I remember I had to have, just this, just relief in my voice, And when I answered, I heard... It was quiet for a second, and then I heard, is this Michaela Burns? And immediately, it was Mike Horn. I knew his voice. And I said, what happened? And he goes, I just need to talk to you face to face. I said, is he dead?
Right.
And he's like, I just need to talk to you face to face.
So he didn't tell you at that point?
No, because he once again, I threw him off answering the phone.
Right.
And he was actually coming up my parents' driveway. And I, once I said, is he dead? And he said, I just need to talk to you face to face. I just threw the phone down. And, I remember my mom was like, wait, let me talk to him. And I don't really remember much after that. I threw the phone down. I walked inside. I think I just fell to the ground. And I remember, my aunt, she was in there crying because apparently everyone in there knew more than what I did at that point. And she was holding my daughter, and, my daughter's smiling at me.
Right. And she's 3 months old at this time?
5 months old, actually. She's 5 months old.
Okay.
But she was little. 3, 5 is pretty much the same thing.
Right.
And she was just smiling, and I thought, what am I going to do? How am I going to get through this? Because, he really loved her. How am I going to get through this? It was very horrible. And, I don't know how long I was on the ground for. Probably not long. But I just felt someone, grab me, and it was Mike. It was Mike Horn. And I felt bad for D.P.S. because nothing went right as far as notifications that night. No one knew where to find me because my parents live out in the middle of nowhere. They literally live out in the woods. And, no one could find me. I don't even know. I don't think my cell phone was listed on his emergency contact. It was a nightmare. And, to make matters worse, this is just the most horrible thing ever. Scott's parents, his dad mainly, liked to listen to the scanner. And Scott hated it. He said, I don't care if you listen to it when I'm not working, but when I'm working, don't listen to it. Don't listen to it. And his mother would say, don't listen to that one. She would get mad at Ronnie.
Right.
Don't listen. I don't want to hear that when he's working. Well, they were listening to it that night.
Wow.
And, when they hear that civilian get on the radio, and they knew that Scott, they could hear him saying things. So they knew where he was, what he was doing. And, when they heard, that guy scream for help, that's how they found out.
Mm. Yeah,
it was terrible.
It was horrible.
Terrible. So no notifications went the way that D.P.S. wanted it to, and I always felt really bad about that for them because, that's not what you want to have happen, but it was chaos. It was a lot of chaos.
And I can't even imagine. So the whole thing really, and that's one of the things I always worry about when we get critical incidents and calls and, heaven forbid, an officer gets killed is the way, especially now, what social media.
Oh my goodness, it just blows
You know,
up.
it just blows up. And what do you remember about what time all this was taking?
8 o'clock.
So that had already spread that fast, and in just a matter of a few minutes.
I think he was
really.
killed at around 8, because I remember it was after American Idol was over. That's how I remember. It's so weird what you remember and what you don't remember. But all of this was going on between like 8 and 9. Like 8:30, 9ish. Just the chaos.
Yeah.
It was crazy. It was awful.
So after that initial, you found out all this. So obviously you're still at your in-laws' house. You're still in the scene.
Well, yeah, yes, sir.
I was at my parents' house.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah, my
parents' house. So what? I mean, talk me through the next couple hours, days. I know you're at work.
Yeah. So D.P.S. shows up on scene, and there was a lot of cops, a lot of the Rangers showed up, and they began the investigation. Within hours, they cut warrants for the guy. I know his last name was Robertson. I don't know his first name. I forgot his first name.
Brandon Wayne Robertson.
Yep. We found out that there was a female with him during this traffic stop. He actually was an ex-cop.
Oh wow.
High on dope, and Scott just randomly did a traffic stop. So this was I recalled it on a Sunday. I guess it was it a Monday? Tuesday.
American Idol.
Idol.
American Idol. Okay, so.
But I could be wrong. It could have been on a Sunday.
Yeah, I don't. So.
I just remember American Idol, whatever night that comes. I haven't watched it since. So.
I know. Well, yeah, I can imagine. I know that several officers, and I mean multiple officers, met that night, and the manhunt kind of went through the next day, and we all kind of made like a pact, like we want this to end or get this guy before the funeral, because next day they went into funeral preparations.
Right.
So the entire East Texas region, for the most part, I mean from Texarkana down to Longview, and I don't mean that broad, but all of Jefferson we had roadblocks. I mean D.P.S. all of region, all of Company 1B was up there. The entire Jefferson, Marion County, Cass County shut down. There was roadblocks everywhere. So it trickled on a couple of days. She began to plan this funeral, and on. But
have you during this time? Have you talked to Tyler at this point?
Yeah,
in between,
we weren't. She and I weren't. That was literally the first time we'd met each other. Was at that party
a week before.
Yeah.
I'll say if I did, I probably don't remember.
Right.
Yeah. No. Yeah, I hadn't talked to her, and honestly, I'm not sure what I would have. Yeah.
Right.
So, I didn't have much sleep at that point in time. Like every single cop in that area, Cass and Marion counties, whether it was city, county, or state, or federal, was completely devoted to trying to find this asshole that just murdered a very much beloved and respected man. So, Michaela, I think on Thursday is when you finalized the funeral, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Thursday was the just the family viewing. Friday was the public viewing, and Saturday was the funeral.
If you want to go into detail or talk about what?
Yeah, because I'm curious about that too. So once, obviously that night, you're shocked. You're still in shock. This whole, was there a resource there or something that helped you get through this to do the planning?
There was. So that very night, I mean, I stayed up all night. I mean, all this happened in the evening. It probably wasn't even 3 hours. Summer Wassif from D.P.S. Victim Services, she, they're out of Dallas. She was at my parents' house, there with me for my, support. Then I remember the colonel and all these people came out. And from what people have told me, even that was a whole thing in itself because, they had to go, he flew in, and I think they flew into the Tyler airport, and they had to go get him from there. And it was just like them even trying to get him to, this hole in the wall place in Northeast Texas was, and so they did not get there until very late. I think it was probably like maybe 2 a.m, 3, but that's just that's what they do, is they come out that night. So I do vaguely remember meeting them. They were all in my parents' house, and yeah, it was crazy. And then Josh Mason, he was Scott's sergeant, but he was also my liaison officer. He was the one taking care of things for me. Like, he came with me to the house to pick out the uniform, which sucked. I hated going into that house. It was awful because, as soon as you walk in, there's like wedding pictures, and it just, I don't remember a whole lot, but I do remember that being very, very traumatic. I just cried the whole time, and Tim Smith, he was a lieutenant with D.P.S. He planned the entire funeral. God love him. I mean, he was amazing. Yeah, he didn't do anything without my say-so. He always asked if, but I don't know what I would have done. I couldn't have planned it. I mean, I was a mess, Well, all of us were. Just even going to pick out the casket was so surreal. I'm 27 years old. No, I was 28 years old, picking out a casket. It just didn't seem real. It was awful.
Well, it's a shock, and then all of a sudden, you're very vulnerable, and you're trying to plan, and planning a funeral is hard enough, but to plan a funeral for an officer that was killed on the line of duty, where it's exponentially larger,
oh yeah,
would have to be horrible.
It was, and I was very fortunate that D.P.S. took care of literally everything for me. I was very lucky. Some of these smaller departments, they don't have, they're not lucky like that. They don't have those kind of resources. But
that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, but I was very fortunate, and I'm always grateful to them because they've always taken care of me. And they planned a beautiful funeral. What I remember of it, it was really nice. But I just remember, Thursday was the family visitation, and we got there. I remember as soon as I stepped out, Mike Horn was there, and he handed me this little blue satin bag. He's bawling, and it's Scott's wedding ring in it, and his gold chain he always wore. And went inside and saw him for the first time, and it was traumatic. It was awful. But when we were walking up to the funeral home, I remember seeing like all these big like SWAT trucks going by, which was unusual because Linden, as most smaller downtowns, just to see that, it was just very weird, and I was like, that's weird, because I just remember seeing like SWAT, and it seemed out of place, but I had so much going on, that I wasn't even thinking about it, and it didn't seem like I was in there with Scott for very long until Summer, my victim service liaison. She came running in there, and she was like, Michaela, I just want you to know it's over. He killed himself. Which he can probably go into more of that.
Yes. Yeah. So you're at the funeral home for the family visitation that night. Y'all have had a manhunt going on now for several days.
Yeah.
Trying to find this guy.
Yeah. So I guess D.P.S. had got some intelligence that he was up near a road, and the interesting thing about this was that this was about 15 miles from where Scott was murdered at. He had driven from Jefferson to Linden. He was actually 3 miles from where you guys were having the funeral.
Yeah, if that, he might not have even been that far.
Yeah, and he was a quarter mile from where Scott grew up, like the feed store.
It wasn't far.
So they had got some intel that he was kind of hid out in this cabin on this back county road, and so they ran a flyover. Well, when they did that, he freaked out, the suspect, and called 911 and started basically saying that he was going to kill the girl that was with him. And so that's when SWAT rolled up, and that's when he went ahead and smoked himself.
So when you're seeing these SWAT vehicles go by, I'm thinking that they're all there for the funeral. But in reality, they're going out to the scene where this guy is.
Correct. Yeah, 'cause this was the family viewing. This was not this was literally just the family for the funeral for them.
Yeah, it was just to be sure that everything looked good on him, and that they didn't need to change anything before the public viewing the next night.
Yeah. We were actively still trying to get this done, taken care of before, to give them and us, honestly us, closure.
Right.
Yeah, it was horrible actually going to the funeral home and knowing that guy was still out there. I do remember that. I remember, because we were all, you become very close with all the police officers and their wives because it's a small department, and it's just a small area. You have Christmas parties and you have barbecues and, and I was terrified that he was going to kill someone else. And I just couldn't imagine someone else having to go through that too. It was horrible. And just him being on the loose, it was just a day, or a day or two, but it felt like forever. It felt like forever. And so I was so relieved when they told me that he was dead.
I was going to ask you that. So as a victim, which you were, once Summer comes running back in there and tells you that, so you immediately felt a little relief that that part's over.
Absolutely.
But then I think what people don't realize is, okay, that part's over, but now you're let's face it, single mom.
Now the hard part begins.
5-month-old baby. Mm-hmm. What do you do to keep going forward?
Yeah.
Whew.
I mean, I know it has, I've been involved with, a lot of officer involved shootings, that kind of stuff. And the widows are remarkably strong,
Yeah.
but they all have a different story of of what their life looks like.
Right.
So what'd you do?
Well, I will say that if it wasn't for having a 5-month-old, I don't know what I would have done. I mean, I know I would have done something different, but you can't sit around and just wither away because you have a baby to take care of.
Yeah.
I had to get up and I had to feed her and I had to keep going on with my life in a sense because nobody else is going to do it for me, nor should they have to. My mom actually, she got sick not long after Scott died. She had lung cancer and she ended up passing away the next year. So she was sick and she couldn't help me. But I just always tried to do what I thought Scott would want me to do. And I made mistakes. I mean, I was 28. They don't give you a handbook
No, we all
on
make
grief.
mistakes.
And, I definitely learned from them, and I've been able to extend myself a little grace with that, But I just stayed really involved with her. And then as a few years went by, I got involved with C.O.P.S. And honestly, the spouse retreat was my first involvement with C.O.P.S. I guess we can talk about that or later or whatever.
Well, what are you talking about, C.O.P.S? You're talking about Concerns of Police Survivors.
Concerns of Police
For people who don't know that, you're not the first person that I've actually heard say that they never had really an involvement until they went to the retreat.
Yes.
So what did that do for you? And I guess another better question is what is the retreat that you're talking about?
So after the funeral and everything and things kind of died down a little, Summer, told me to be looking out for this organization called the Concerns of Police Survivors, that they're going to get in touch with me. And it's really important that I answer my phone because they're going to have information on the Texas Memorial and the National Memorial. And she also said, there's a retreat coming up, a spouse retreat for surviving spouses. And it's in Potosi, Missouri, and it's in September. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's really close. I mean, it's only 4 months.
Yeah.
And I was like, nah, I don't know about that. I don't think I want to go to that. And she was very persistent. She was almost to the point of being annoying. But I thank God that she was. She did her job because, I made a lot of excuses why I shouldn't go. I have a newborn. She's only going to be like 9 months at the time. I would have to drive 3 hours to Dallas by myself. I had to fly by myself. These are all things I didn't want to do, But she really encouraged me to do it, and I did. And that was the first time in 4 months that I felt hope.
That's good.
It was because I tell people I did have a lot of support when Scott was killed. I had my family. But you could be in a room with 200 people and feel completely alone because no one knew what I was going through. No one in that area had their husband shot and killed, and so no one understood what I was going through, and I felt really alone. And when I went to the spouse retreat, I almost turned around and came back. When I landed in Missouri, I had like a huge meltdown, So I was like, I mean, I looked for flights on the way back. I was like, I can't do this. But I went to the bathroom and I kind of collected myself a little, and I was like, I'm going to at least go into the little room that you're supposed to meet in, and I'm just going to get a feel for it. You know, if they're all crazy, I'm going to leave. And I was really hoping they were all going to be crazy because I really didn't want to be there. But I went down there, and immediately they just embraced me, you know.
Well, you're part of I hate to say it, but you're part of a small group of individuals that nobody can understand what you've gone through except that other small group of individuals.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And being at that retreat that weekend was just it was life changing for the better. You know, I saw people laughing. You know, I didn't think I was ever going to do that again. You know, I mean, people were laughing and having a good time, and they were at different stages in their grief. And I thought, okay, it's not always going to be this bad, because shock is a real thing. And I was still in a little bit sense of shock when I went there. I mean, I was very numb to, you know, it was just unbelievable to me that had happened, you know.
And you can't put a timeline on grief.
Oh, no.
And I think so many times that something happens to somebody, we need to get over that. Well, you know what? I went through a spell. I lost my mom and 2 brothers in the matter of just, a very short period of time. And you can't put a time on that grief. And there's still days today where you suffer the grief. And I'm sure even today, both of you, both of you go through episodes like that.
You know, it is a new normal. You know, you find a new normal. It changes you. You can let it change you for the worse, or you can let it change you for the better. You know, and I try to take what happened and do a little good with it, because I think that's what Scott would want. You know, and C.O.P.S is one of the things that helped me get through a lot of stuff. You know, finding other people who understood what I was going through.
Well, just finding hope.
Yes.
I mean, I think that's the best way you put it.
Absolutely. Because at that point, I didn't think I was going to find it.
There's so many cool organizations that we support, being Tmpa. And I'm not saying that one's better than the other, but I will say this. Concerns of Police Survivors, I think, holds a very, very special place in, I think, all of our hearts, because it's just a phenomenal organization for what they stand for. I mean, you can only be a director, or not an elected official with C.O.P.S, but you can only be on their board if you're a survivor.
Absolutely, yes.
And that's, by God, if we don't stand for that, or if we don't support something like that, then I don't know where our heart's at.
And just the resources. What happens is, if we have an officer who gets hurt or injured or killed in the line of duty, one of our very first calls is to C.O.P.S.
Yeah.
Because y'all, just like you said earlier, no one knows what you've been through.
Yeah.
Except people in that organization.
Absolutely.
So who better to help a new person in that club, that somebody that's already been through it and understands, you know what, I went through 4 months with no hope.
Yeah.
Here's what to expect. Here's what's going to happen. But there is some hope.
Absolutely.
Through that.
Absolutely. And I always tell people, C.O.P.S events, they can be overwhelming at times, but I always encourage people, when you go to something with C.O.P.S, whether it's a retreat or the memorial, any of that, I always encourage people to go twice. Do it twice, because the first time it's overwhelmed. It's overwhelming. But you get a different perspective when you go back the next time, and things are a little different, and you can appreciate it more. So I always tell people, if you don't like it for some reason the first time, don't give up on it. Go back, because they are very beneficial. People who lost their husbands, and I'm not trying to make light of anybody else's loss, but when you're a police officer and you're killed, it's different. It's just a whole different element. It's so public. Your grief is quite public. And it has a different dynamic to it. And so other people who understand that dynamic really understand you. And so...
Yeah.
Well, just the whole process. You were talking about, planning the funeral. Well, a police officer who's killed in line of duty, that funeral is not just like your normal funeral in Lindale, Texas. Or Linden. It's a huge...
Yes.
It's a huge deal.
It was.
Yeah. So
just logistically... most people never have to go through that.
Yeah. It was a humbling experience, I can tell you that. I don't think I've ever seen that many people.
So 4 months, go to C.O.P.S retreat, come back. I mean, walk me through. I know, like I said, there's no timeline on grief, but obviously you're sitting here with us today.
Yeah. I had a few rough years. I also had a lot of people in my family die. My mom, she died a year after Scott did, and then like three of her sisters died right after that. My sister died in a really tragic way. She killed herself. Well, she was my niece, but we were very close. She's 5 years younger than me, so we would always kind of switch out sister, niece, depending on who we were with. But she took her own life. She was only 28, and then Scott's dad passed from a heart attack, and then Scott's brother's wife died from cancer, and then my dad died. This is all in a 5-year span. Wow. So it was tough, And
so let me touch on that. So I just told you I had my mom, 2 brothers, all within the, and I'm all about going to see a therapist, right? They said it's almost better off if you lose everybody at once, because what happens is what you went through is you never get a chance to grieve before you're getting hit with something else.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it was back to back. I had compounded grief, absolutely. Therapy, yes. That is one of the main things that got me through a lot of stuff is I visited a therapist frequently. And honestly, getting back into church helped quite a bit. Because I was very angry. I was angry, the same place that our wedding had been at just, a year prior was where his funeral was. And I remember when I went back to church for the first time, I was mad. Micah was crying the entire time. Everybody was staring at me. It just, I was mad, and I didn't want to have anything to do with church or God or anything else. And, I think with, as the years progressed and maturity and life tends to grow you up faster than what you want to, and, I think just understanding that, things happen. And I don't know why they happen. I'm not here to try to figure out, but you have to do the best with what you're given, and I didn't want to just be a miserable person, because what am I teaching my daughter? Yep. That, every time something bad happens to you, you got to feel sorry for yourself. No, you have to kind of make the best out of something. And, so that was kind of our motto, was we just tried to, live our best life. And, therapy, absolutely. C.O.P.S functions, yes. Yep. Retreats.
Well, the more, Clint says it, it's okay not to be okay.
Absolutely.
And, I've had my sister-in-law killed herself. I've also had, since 2005, 5 really close friends, police officers, kill themselves. It's terrible. Okay not to be okay.
Yeah.
But make sure you go talk to somebody about that.
Absolutely.
And people get angry, but you can't, God is good.
Absolutely.
But nobody says that God is going to be good to us all the time as far as what we think should be.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So that's just kind of how I, made it through. I'm still a little crazy, but
aren't we all?
Right. Well, I date a cop too, so that I'm definitely crazy.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, so I just met you today for the first time, and I thank you for sharing your story with me. I mean, it was I can, especially after hearing not only your husband for a short time, but then just your family and everything that happened. I can't imagine, but here we are. We're both, you're sitting here today, smiling. You have hope.
Absolutely, life is good. It is good. Yep. It's tough, and no one ever said it was going to be perfect. I mean, I do. You grieve what could have been. Milestones are hard. My daughter's lucky because, I've dated Chris for 10 years, and, he's a police officer. He worked with Harris County for a while, and he just moved out to Chambers County. And, I'm fortunate that he was there. We've been dating since Micah was 5. Right. But, those little milestones, and you grieve. You just grieve in different ways, and I mean, I'm lucky that he was there, that he's there to kind of, step in the role but it's still, it's still tough. And tomorrow's Scott's birthday.
Oh, wow.
Yep, he would have been 54.
Wow.
And then he was killed April 29th. So, it's just sad. It's sad seeing, you always wonder, how he would have been with Micah, or, how different things might have been, And so she goes to kids camp, and that helped her a lot.
Kids camp's another program through C.O.P.S. And that's for the children.
Yes, you have to be from 6 to 14. And she actually just graduated from kids camp this past year. And she's going to be
Does she plan on getting involved or staying involved with C.O.P.S?
Yes, they actually have a young adults camp in Georgia that they get to go to from 15 to 21, I believe, 21. So she gets, she's excited about, she has to fly by herself for the first time. But, she, I used to hate it when people would say, well, at least she was little and she doesn't remember.
Yeah, no.
And I always say,
That's horrible.
there's no good, it's all bad. It doesn't matter if you have a kid that's 13, if you have a baby, it's all horrible. Like I couldn't imagine now telling her that her dad had died to me, that's horrible. Like, I think that's terrible, but when you're a baby, you're right. You don't remember because you don't have any memories.
Right.
Her memories are what we give her.
Yeah.
And, there's only a handful of pictures with her and her dad. And my, 2 years of stories runs thin, and so I always tell people, if you have a story about Scott, please tell her.
Man, yeah.
She would love to hear it. She loves talking about him, even if it's the same story over and over. She loves it because that's all she has.
Well,
She doesn't have,
I'm glad we're telling the story today.
Absolutely. She
Yeah.
doesn't have the 39 years of memories that a lot of other people do.
And I'm going to tell you this, before you came in this morning, Tyler was telling me stories. And just from what little bit he told me, you lost a wonderful husband.
I did. He was a really good man. And that's what's so tragic is, when I take my daughter back to Linden and we talk to people, I can't tell you how many people said, Scott was my best friend. He was my best friend, because he was everybody's best friend.
And that tells you what kind of man he is right there.
Absolutely. He
Yeah.
was kind to everybody. And I tell her, that she absolutely has to be the same way. He really was. He was very kind to people. He actually didn't like writing tickets.
No, he didn't.
And
He
it's a
felt
state trooper.
bad. Yes, he would feel bad. And just a quick story about him. He worked his first fatality not long before he was killed. He worked a couple of fatalities, but one was this older woman, and she was in a car wreck, died, and he worked that, and it killed him. It tore him up so much that he, because he had to contact her daughter and let her know. Her daughter was in her 50s or so, she was older, but it killed him that he had to make that notification. Absolutely tore him up. And he kept in touch with her. There were 2 fatalities that he ended up working, and he kept in touch with the victims' families. And after he was killed, they reached out to me, and one of the women, she made me these ornaments with our picture in it that I still put up on my tree every year. She made me a scrapbook page, because I got in contact with him after he was killed. But that's just the kind of person he was, He didn't have to go back and talk to those families, but it hurt his heart that he had to do that he had to make that notification. And, I know that telling them and their reaction just was embedded in his heart and his brain. And that was just his way, I guess, of, maybe dealing with it, was checking up on them and being sure they were okay, which he didn't have to do that, but he did. That's just the kind of person he was.
Right.
He was best.
And that speaks volumes, which is why, all law enforcement officers out there, the vast majority, you say he doesn't like writing. We don't like writing tickets. It's just part of the job. But we're also human.
Yeah.
So when that fatality accident happens, it's horrible to give a death notification. And so obviously the way he did that was personal.
Yes.
Because he took it personal. Mm-hmm. And then that's why they kept in touch with him for that long. And just like the stories Tyler was sharing this morning, just about taking, on his days off, going and riding with Tyler to make sure he was going to be safe as a young officer, that doesn't happen anymore.
No, he really was. He was a very good person.
He was a good cop.
He was.
No bullshit. This dude was a good cop. To this day, there's a podcast. So there was a podcast that I was telling you about, Devil's Town.
Yeah. Gilmer.
Okay. So this
theory of this missing woman was referenced back to Scott Burns. Scott stops a man that had two mentally disabled people in the vehicle that was headed towards coming into Marion County from Upshur County. They had some sexual paraphernalia, multiple sexual paraphernalia inside the vehicle. We can kind of expand upon that. Use your mental, use your imagination there. And what Scott found out, and you may not know this story. They were headed to Shreveport. Scott stopped him for a tail light that was out. The girl was mentally handicapped. She was, I think she was 17 or 16, and the guy had a lot of videotape equipment inside the vehicle.
I do remember that. I forgot all about that.
And so what they found, there was a .22 pistol in the vehicle. Scott immediately notifies CID. The Rangers didn't come out, but a CID guy came out. They executed a search warrant on the guy's house, and it busted wide open child pornography case.
And that's the one that was in Gilmer they were talking about in that podcast. Absolutely. Wow. It's crazy.
Yeah. But it was because of Scott's work. But that was just one of many of what Scott he liked. That was his bread and butter. He didn't like writing tickets or working with town. He liked the criminal aspect of the D.P.S. mentality. That's what he liked doing.
Well, but that traffic stop is what led to that.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, he was good at what he did.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Michaela, I enjoyed meeting you.
Yes, it was nice to meet you too. Thank you all for having me.
Yeah, this has been a heavy episode, but we're going to end it with 3 rapid fire questions. Really, I guess I'll end it with both of you guys if you want to.
Well, she's already had her rapid fire one, so I'm curious to see if her answers are going to change.
They're probably not.
I've actually been thinking about them more.
Good.
I felt like I froze the last time a little bit.
All right. So, both of you, favorite line or favorite cop movie? Favorite line from a cop movie or favorite cop movie? Favorite patrol car and favorite drink?
Go ahead.
Okay, so the only thing that changed this time was I still like Bruce Willis in the Die Hard movies.
Okay.
Best Christmas movie ever.
Yes, I do like it when he says yippee-ki-yay, but I also like it when he says, hey, asshole. I love that. But when I left, I thought, oh, my God, I can't believe I didn't say this. Dirty Harry. Come on. How can you not,
Great.
Come on.
Yep. All right.
I couldn't believe I forgot that one. I still like the Camaro. The D.P.S. Camaro. What was it? Oh, drink martini. It's still a dirty martini.
Dirty martini.
And if I want to switch it up, I like Cape Cods too, but I really like dirty martinis.
So I have a son that lives in Boston who goes to Cape Cod quite a bit. So I got to ask him how his Cape Cod game is. I've never had one.
It's vodka cranberry with lime. It's just a fancy word of saying a vodka cranberry. Yeah, with lime.
Try it out.
Never had one. We're a little too small townish for the Cape Cod.
Exactly. This is a Linden girl or an Atlantic girl.
No, Atlanta.
Atlanta. Step up from Linden.
Montbellevue.
I'm in Montbellevue now.
Montbellevue.
Ooh.
Well, so I have listened to every podcast, like every one of them, and I got to give a shout out to Dallas ATO because I listen to theirs every week also.
Joe King.
Yeah. So I'm gonna say my favorite. I've thought about this long and hard, and it's gonna have to be Dirty Harry. It's the best movie with the best line. Do you feel lucky?
Yeah.
Punk. I will say, End of Watch is another great cop movie.
Oh yeah.
I've seen that.
Very heavy, and I like how it starts off with the whole thing. I'm a police officer.
Probably the best one that depicts law enforcement.
Yeah,
I think.
that's a really good one.
Is that the one with Jake Gyllenhaal?
It is.
I haven't watched that.
It's heavy.
I didn't know if I was ready for that.
It's heavy.
Yeah, I don't know.
I can't watch Live PD either.
Yeah.
Body Cam. I can't watch that either.
Yeah, it's heavy.
Eh.
Crown Vic.
Clint McNair, write it down.
Crown
Tony
Vic.
Wright, Clint McNair.
Got to say Crown Vic.
Thank you, sir.
Best car ever.
Ever.
And the official drink of the Tmpa field rep. It may not be fancy, but we're not fancy.
That's right.
It's Maker's Mark.
Maker's Mark.
It's good. It's pretty good.
Well,
Yeah.
the official mixed drink. We can't go Cape Cod. It's going to have to be the old fashioned.
Yeah.
And if you ever find yourself in Mineral Wells, Texas, the best old fashioned is at Coffee and Cocktails at the corner right across from the Baker Hotel.
Yeah, I'm about to try that out.
Yeah, we'll go.
Try that out.
We'll go.
Hey, I appreciate you co-hosting today and interviewing me.
But I love it.
Yeah, great time. Great time.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
Hey, I appreciate you coming back for the second round.
Hey, if you need me for round 3, I'm here.
Well, oh God,
Call me.
please don't say that. Oh God, that'd be so bad. That'd be horrible.
Wouldn't that be bad?
Oh,
My gosh, I felt so bad for him when he said I lost everything. You're not going to believe it.
I mean, it gave me more time to get my hair fixed and Botox
I waited
done,
and
but
waited
you
and
know.
waited. I kept looking at the phone, and I kept waiting for the phone to call you. And Janet was like, "What? Are you going to call her?" I was like, "I really don't want to." I mean, I was hoping the audio would show up, but it never did.
Oh, I was excited because I was like, yes, I can get my hair done, get some Botox, and they still couldn't fit me in. I was like, no. So this is me. All its glory.
Well, you guys stay safe out there. This has been a heavy episode. Thank you for taking time to listen. Again, Michaela, thank you for coming down.
It was my pleasure.
Tony,
Absolutely.
I appreciate you coming on, and hope to have you back.
Anytime.
Absolutely.
Anytime.
You guys hit that subscribe button, hit the download button. Man, we love you guys. Stay safe. God bless you guys, and as always, may God bless Texas.